4-year residency in anatomic and clinical pathology at the Mount Sinai Medical Center. That was followed by a 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology at the Miami-Dade Medical Examiner's Office. I then worked for 2 years as an associate medical examiner for the Palm Beach Medical Examiner's Office, and for the last 10 years I've been working for District 6.
And in your time as an associate medical examiner, how many autopsies have you think you performed?
I would say approximately 3,000 to 3,500.
All right. And I asked you if you're a doctor. Are you medically licensed in the state of Florida?
Yes.
Any other states?
No.
All right. Are you a member of any associations related to forensic pathology?
Yes, I'm a member of the Florida Association of Medical Examiners, the National Association of Medical Examiners, and the American Academy of Forensic Sciences.
And, okay. All right. Dr. Wilson, were you called on to perform an autopsy on an individual named Shannon Griffin?
Yes.
And on what day did you perform the autopsy?
The autopsy was performed on October 24, 2010.
Okay. Let's talk about that autopsy in the general terms first. Walk the jury through what you would do generally in an autopsy.
Well, first I would get some preliminary information on the case from the forensic investigator, who is the person who gets the first set of information from the person reporting the case to our office. Once I get that background information, I would then examine the body, looking for external features such as the color of the hair, color of the eyes, and any external injuries. Depending on the case, the body may then be x-rayed to see if there are any things like projectiles within the body or any broken bones. Once that is completed, the internal examination begins, where I would open up the body, remove various body fluids such as blood, fluid from the eye, and urine for toxicology. I would then remove every organ, examine each organ for an injury or any disease pattern. And at the conclusion of the autopsy, depending on what my findings are, I would then determine a cause of death, or I may decide to wait for the toxicology results to come in before I determine the cause and manner of death.
All right. And is that the procedure you followed in examining Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
All right. Preliminarily, did you make note of Mr. Griffin, his height, or his length?
Yes, we measured him as 73 inches in length.
Okay. And did you take a weight?
Yes, he weighed 185 pounds.
All right. And from your brief, external examination, did you find evidence of injury?
Yes.
All right. And what were those particular injuries that you observed?
The deceased had 4 gunshot wounds at the chest.
All right. Okay. So for there to be a gunshot wound, are you able to determine whether a gunshot wound is what we call an entry wound or an exit wound?
Yes, there are ways to distinguish entrance from exit.
And in this case, were you able to determine how many entry wounds?
There were 4 entry wounds.
And how many exit wounds were you able to determine?
Only 1 exit wound.
All right. The record, Your Honor, I'm showing defense counsel what's been marked as state's exhibits. 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, and 41. As well as 42, 43, and 44. Dr. Wilson, I'm going to show you a collection of photographs. Take a second to look through all the photographs and let me know when you've had a chance to familiarize yourself.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Wilson, are those photographs collected in the course of the medical examiner's examination of Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Do they contain the unique medical examiner's report number?
Yes.
All right. Judge, at this time, the state would seek to admit what's been marked as state's exhibits number 35 through 44.
Any objection, Mr. Trevina?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, they're admitted.
Commissioner Publisher, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Dr. Wilson, I provided you with a pointer on the witness stand. I'm going to be putting the images up. If it would help in explaining your testimony, feel free to stand up and kind of point to the items. I'd like to show you State's Exhibit number 38. Dr. Wilson, could you identify for the jury where you found the 4 gunshot wounds entry wounds we were talking about?
Sure. May I step
You
up?
please stand up, and I have a pointer there for you as well.
This is a picture of the basically the chest and the right upper arm of the deceased. And these holes, one on the right upper chest near the right shoulder, one in the middle of the chest here, and 2 on the right chest in this area here. These are the entry wounds that I previously alluded to.
Okay. Let's talk about gunshot wound. As you labeled them A, B, and C for the purposes of your examination?
Yes, they were labeled gunshot wound A, B, C, and D.
Okay. Let's talk about gunshot wound A. Dr. Wilson, what is it about this wound or this injury that allows you to classify it as a entering wound?
Well, you can see from the characteristic of this wound that it's very well circumscribed, a round oval shape, very sharp borders. There is this area of pink tissue, which is an abrasion color, which is seen in entrance of gunshot wounds, and just that very sharp, definitive edge and the abrasion color tells me that it's an entrance wound.
Okay. I would now like to show you what's been entered in State's Exhibit number 37. Dr. Wilson, can you describe what's represented here in State's Exhibit number 37?
Yes, this is a picture of the back of the right shoulder, and in this area here, you can see the exit wound associated with gunshot wound A. It's an exit wound because the edges are very irregular and ragged. There's no particular abrasion color associated with this, but the irregularity of the wound tells me it's an exit wound. And there's also a red abrasion just above the exit wound as well.
As it relates to gunshot wound A, being that there is an entry wound and an exit wound, were you able to determine, or were you able to find a projectile associated with that injury?
No, there was no projectile retained from this particular gunshot wound.
Okay. When you examine the wound externally, you can see it's an entry wound and an exit wound. Do you conduct further projectile may have traveled?
Yes, I would determine the path by basically looking to see where the blood is dispersed within the body.
Okay, it's kind of like looking for a blood trail within the body.
Correct.
And were you able to determine a path of travel of the projectile as it relates to gunshot wound A?
Yes.
Could you describe that to the jury?
That projectile pathway was from front to back, slightly left to right, and slightly upwards.
Okay. And were you able to determine how far that bullet traveled through the body?
I estimated that it went through about 5 inches through the body.
Okay. Let's now talk about gunshot wound B. Let's show you what's been entered in as State's Exhibit 40. When you look at State's Exhibit 40, can you determine where on the body is this injury?
Well, it's a close-up, so it's kind of difficult to determine just from this photograph, but from the overall photograph, this would have been in the center of the chest.
Okay. And does it contain the same unique features as a entrance wound?
Yes, again, it's an oval wound, very sharp, circumscribed borders, a little bit of a pinkish abrasion color to the around the wound, so this is an entry wound.
And was there an associated exit wound with this injury?
No.
Because of that, were you able to recover a projectile associated with gunshot wound B?
Yes.
All right. Were you able to determine a path of travel as it relates to gunshot wound B?
You're at risk of injuring the surrounding structures such as the heart, not in this particular case, but the aorta, which is a large blood vessel that arises from the heart and delivers blood throughout the rest of your body. So if you injure that blood vessel, basically blood is not circulating to the rest of your organs and tissues, and you die as a result of that.
All right. Was there further evidence as to the injury to the aorta? Meaning specifically, if the heart is pumping blood, was there evidence of blood leaking out of the heart into his chest?
Yes, there was a 300 cc accumulation of blood around the heart, known as the hemopericardium, as well as 350 cc's of blood in the left chest cavity.
Okay. Again, as you've kind of described the injuries, could you describe the path that the projectile took through Mr. Griffin's body?
This particular projectile went from front to back, from right to left, and slightly downwards.
Okay. And again, you said you recovered a projectile associated with this injury, correct?
Yes.
All right. And now I'd like to show you what's been entered in as State's Exhibit number 41. I'll zoom out and then we can kind of get a reference point. You can see gunshot wound B, and
this would be gunshot wound B here, and the top one would be gunshot wound C, and the bottom one gunshot wound D.
all right, let's talk about gunshot wound C.
Okay, gunshot wound C again is an entrance gunshot wound, again because of the oval and very sharply defined borders, as well as the slight pink abrasion color around the entrance wound.
All right, it appears as though gunshot wound C, and for that matter gunshot wound B, have some gray matter around the injury. Can you describe what that is?
Well, in this particular case, the grayish-black material, I have assumed it to be what is known as bullet wipe, which is basically the accumulation of oil and various dirty particles as the bullet is going through the gun. It accumulates on the bullet and then deposits itself on the skin. I do not believe that this is the more commonly associated soot that one is familiar with respect to entrance gunshot wounds.
Okay, let's take a second to talk about that. You kind of mentioned soot. What is soot?
Soot really is the deposition on the skin of completely burnt gunpowder fragments. If the muzzle of the gun is anywhere from 12 inches or less away from the body at the time that the gun is fired, soot may be deposited on the skin, assuming there is no intervening object between the muzzle of the gun and the skin.
Intervening objects such as clothing.
Correct.
Okay, so if an individual has a shirt, one, two, maybe a jacket, those are things that can prevent soot from depositing on the skin.
Yes.
But you still could potentially have this bullet wipe as you described it.
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to determine any injuries related internally as to gunshot wound C?
Yes. Gunshot wound C went through the skin and subcutaneous tissues, went into the upper lobe of the right lung, the lower lobe of the right lung, and was then recovered from the right middle back.
All right. So this projectile caused some injury to his lungs.
Yes.
All right. And was there a projectile recovered associated with that injury?
Yes.
Were you able to determine an exact path as to which the bullet took?
Yes, this particular projectile went from front to back, right to left and downwards.
Let's speak about gunshot wound D, also represented in this photograph.
As I said before, gunshot wound D is the lower gunshot wound in this particular picture. Again, it's oval, well circumscribed. There is a slight pink abrasion color, as well as the deposition of this grayish-black kind of greasy material, which is the bullet wipe.
All right. And what injuries were you able to determine that were associated with a gunshot wound D?
D, again, went through the skin and subcutaneous tissues, through the left lung, both upper as well as lower lobes, and was recovered from the left middle back.
All right. And the same question, were you able to determine a path of injury that was associated with that injury, or that gunshot wound, I should say?
Yes, this one went from front to back, right to left, and downwards.
All right. One moment. Dr. Wilson, you can have a seat, sir. I don't think. Were you able to determine whether or not Mr. Griffin had any other injuries associated to his body?
Yes, he had variously scattered abrasions and contusions throughout the rest of his body.
Okay. Specifically, did you find injuries on his left hand?
Yes.
All right. I'd like to show you what's been admitted in State's Exhibit number 35. Can you describe what's in this photograph as it relates to the injuries on Mr. Griffin's body?
Sure. This is a picture of the back of the left hand and in the area of the index finger, as well as in the by the knuckles here. You can see the areas of reddish discoloration. Those would be abrasions or scrapes on the skin to the back of the left hand.
All right. And again, in State's Exhibit number 36, this is the same hand, just kind of a different angle on it.
Gives a better picture of the abrasions or scrapes on the back of the hand near the knuckles.
Dr. Wilson, can you tell, for just examining those injuries, how those injuries may have gotten to his hand?
Basically, abrasions would be evidence of blunt trauma to the hand, so either the hand scraped against a blunt object, causing the skin to slough off, or a blunt object was struck on the skin, causing again the skin cells to slough off.
For the record, Your Honor, I'm showing defense counsel what's been marked as State's Exhibits 45, 46, 47, and 48. Dr. Wilson, take a second to look at State's Exhibits 45, 46, 47, and 48.
Okay.
You recognize those photographs?
Yes.
Dr. Wilson, as part of your examination of Mr. Griffin, do you also take x-rays?
Yes.
And these photographs represent x-rays for which you took or were taken of Mr. Griffin?
That's correct.
Judge, at this time, the state would seek to admit 45, 46, 47, and 48.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right, they're admitted.
Dr. Wilson, we talked about the location of some of the projectiles. I'd like to show you State's Exhibit number 45. Let me zoom out. Can you describe what's in this X-ray?
Sure, this, for orientation purposes, these areas here would be the ribs on the left side, and on the upper aspect of the picture, as well as on the lower aspect, you see these white shadows, which are the projectiles on the left side of the body.
Okay.
And again, State's Exhibit number 46.
Again, these areas of white curves are the ribs on the right side of the body, and on the lower aspect here is the image of the projectile.
State's Exhibit number 48.
This area of the photograph in the middle would be your spine or vertebral column. And this would be the right side of the picture, left side of the picture, and you can see on either side, again, the two projectiles.
Finally, State's Exhibit number 47.
Again, down the middle would be the spine or vertebral column, the ribs coming off of the vertebral column or the spine, and on the upper aspect, on the left side would be the image of the projectile.
All right. Dr. Wilson, as part of your examination, do you in fact remove these projectiles?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and when they're removed, are they photographed?
Yes.
All right. That's what I showed you, a collection of photographs, state's exhibits, which have been entered in as state's exhibits 42, 43, and 44. Judges, may I have permission to publish?
Yes.
I'll show you state's exhibit number 42, just for close-up purposes. It says here this is the projectile from the left upper back.
Yes.
State's exhibit number 43. It says this is from the right mid back.
Yes.
State's exhibit number 44. This is from the left mid back.
Correct.
Can you provide those projectiles back to the law enforcement agency?
Yes.
May I have a moment?
Yes.
Dr. Wilson, as part of your examination, you mentioned earlier that's part of your determination, you determine the cause of death,
Yes.
and you also determine the manner of death.
Yes.
And sometimes you can make those determinations based solely on an autopsy,
Correct.
and sometimes you have to wait for a toxicology report.
Yes.
Was a toxicology report prepared in this case?
Yes.
And were you able to determine, and this is of Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
were you able to determine if he had any alcohol in his system?
Just consult the report.
Yes.
Yes, there was alcohol in the system.
And were you able to determine how much?
In the blood, we quantitated the alcohol as 0.017 grams per deciliter.
Okay, and were you able to determine whether or not there was any drugs in his system?
There were no drugs found in the system that we could determine.
Back to this cause of death, were you able to determine, as it relates to Mr. Griffin, in this case, what his cause of death was?
Yes.
And what was the cause of death in this case?
In this case, the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds.
You say multiple gunshot wounds. Are you able to determine, is it possible to determine which gunshot wound ultimately led to his demise?
No.
All right. As it relates to the manner of death, were you able to determine what the manner of death in this case was?
Yes.
And what was that?
It was a homicide.
And what does that mean?
Homicide basically means that a person died as a result of an actions of another.
All right. And that's part of your statistical findings that you're required to report under the Florida statutes, correct?
Yes.
All right. No further questions.
Cross-examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
I noticed that you conducted this autopsy, looking at your report, on October 24th at 10:20 a.m.
That is correct.
The death itself occurred only the day previous, correct, or that evening?
Yes, that is correct.
Was there a request that this case be expedited for autopsy purposes, or it just happened that it was slow at the medical examiner's office then?
We receive cases on a 24-hour basis. Usually we would either autopsy the case the same day or the next day.
Very good. Now, I heard the state attorney ask you about alcohol and drugs in the victim's system, and I believe you said that there were no drugs in his system, correct?
That we could determine.
Now, let me ask you about marijuana, for example. In general, marijuana has a tendency to stay in the system much longer than most other drugs.
I'm not a toxicologist. I really can't answer that question.
You've not had that issue before dealing with the longevity of marijuana in a person's system?
No.
And have no knowledge of that?
Correct.
You also indicated that there was no stippling around the gunshot wounds, correct?
I didn't testify to that, but it is in my report, yes.
Okay. And that indicates, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this was not a close contact discharge, that it had to be at least some distance away for there not to be any stippling effect. Also taken together with no soot, no powder burns, that type of thing.
Well, it indicates that it's an indeterminate type of gunshot wound. By indeterminate it means that I cannot determine the range of fire in this particular case. If a gunshot wound were to have stippling, which would be the presence of very fine pinpoint abrasions around the entrance wound, that would indicate that the muzzle of the gun was anywhere from 2 inches to 2 feet away from the skin at the time that the gun was fired. However, similar to soot, if there is an intervening object, that could interfere with that finding. So if you have something like a dry wall or multiple layers of clothing, even if the gun is within 2 feet from the skin at the time of being fired, the layers of clothing may interfere with stippling being deposited on the skin.
With that understanding, in this specific case, the lack of stippling, the lack of any type of powder burns on the body, and your examination of the wounds, would it be accurate to say that this was not a close contact shot, that it was at least some distance away from the person? I know you can't tell us how far, but can you tell us it wasn't close contact?
I can only say it's an indeterminate range. I mean, I can't tell you because of the possibility of intervening objects between the muzzle as well as the skin.
Okay. Well, were you provided with the clothing that the victim was wearing at the time?
The clothing was removed at the scene and did not come into the office.
Okay. Did anyone relay to you that there was anything unusual about the clothing, anything of any evidentiary value with respect to the bullets passing through the clothing?
The forensic investigator who went out to the scene did take pictures of the clothing, and from the pictures, it would appear to me that soot was deposited around the entrance wounds, or at least some of the entrance wounds on the clothing.
Okay, and what does that tell you?
If that is soot, which, you know, I can only determine just based on looking at the pictures, it would tell me that the muzzle of the gun possibly would have been anywhere from 12 inches or less away from the skin.
Okay. But you don't know if that was in fact soot that was found, if I understand you correctly?
You'd have to analyze the clothing to determine if it really was soot or not.
Okay, and you have no idea whether that was done in this case?
I do not.
Which projectile or projectiles, plural, do you believe caused death?
Any of the 3 projectiles that were recovered may have contributed to his death.
Was the victim shot 3 times or 4 times?
4 times.
4 times. And any of the 3 chest wounds, are you indicating could be potentially fatal?
I would say either gunshot wounds B, C, or D could have been potentially fatal.
Were all the bullet wounds on the front of the victim's body?
Yes.
Okay, so he
All the
wasn't
entrance
shot.
wounds.
I'm sorry?
All the entrance wounds.
So he was not shot from behind?
The entrance wounds were to the front, so I can't really tell you where the perpetrator was, but all I can tell you is that the entrances were at the front of the body.
Do you ever collect from bodies that you're conducting an autopsy GSR, gunshot residue?
That's up to the crime scene department from the police department.
You yourself or your staff do not do that?
Correct.
And I believe I understood you to say you were not aware that the victim's pants were pulled down?
At the time that the deposition was taken, I believe that's correct.
Have you since looked at the photos or refreshed your recollection as to that issue?
I did look at the photos, but I must admit it didn't strike me whether his pants were pulled down or not. I mean, it's unfortunately a common fashion statement these days, so I really can't tell you one way or the other. I don't specifically recall in my reviewing the photos whether his pants were pulled down or not.
Okay. This was a situation where they just aren't being worn low. They were unbuttoned, unzipped, and literally pulled down his body. Does that refresh? I'm sorry.
I don't object, Judge.
Sustained.
The amount of alcohol found in the body, that was fairly minimal.
That is correct.
Did you take any DNA swabs from the body?
No.
Did you or your staff conduct any kind of examination as to whether or not there was any sexual activity with the victim in the 12 to 24 hours before this autopsy?
No.
You do have the capability through your office, do you not, to swab an individual's penis, throat, mouth, anal cavities to collect evidence, correct?
Yes.
Was that done in this case?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Now, did you have a representative of your office at the scene when this body was discovered?
Yes, the forensic investigator, who is the person who gets the initial call from the police agency or the person reporting the case, would be the one who would respond to the scene.
Okay. And did you get briefed at all by that individual before or even during your autopsy procedure?
Yes.
And the investigator from your office
Long day for you with the law.
At least it was in the morning when I'm fresh and all, yeah.